Have you ever wondered what happens to a soul that dies in mortal sin, and what, if anything, can still be done for them? Lucia of Fatima once received a vision so terrifying she wept for days. Padre Pio, marked by the wounds of Christ, confirmed what she saw and added a truth even more unsettling. There is a mystery that few dare speak of. What happens when a mass is offered for a soul that may already be lost? Is it too late? Or is there still a crack of light that heaven can pour through? Today, you'll hear the chilling, beautiful truth. Through Lucia's silent visions, Padre Pio's testimony, and stories of real people who dared to hope against hope, because what happens at the altar reaches further than we think. It began in silence. Lucia had spent the afternoon alone in the old convent chapel, her veil drawn low, her fingers quietly circling the rosary that had become more worn with each passing year. She had just returned from the funeral of a man she once knew, a skeptic, known for his mocking words and hardened heart. No last confession, no final absolution. He had died suddenly. She had prayed for him out of love. But something inside her, something painful and cold, refused to be at peace. That night, as she knelt again in her cell, she whispered the question that had grown heavier with each prayer. Can a mass help the soul of someone who died far from God? There was no thunder, no voice, only the silence, but the silence was different. For 3 nights Lucia would wake before dawn, weeping, her pillow soaked, her chest tight with a sorrow she could not name. She did not speak of it, not even to the other sisters. She only prayed, harder, and waited. And then, on the 4th night, she had a vision. She saw a soul, grey and flickering like smoke, wandering along a bleak, dry field, its feet dragging as if chained. It looked lost, cracked, exhausted, but it was not alone. At the far end of the field stood an altar, and on that altar a chalice was being lifted high into blinding light. As the chalice rose, a shockwave of brightness pulsed out from it, like a bell rung in the spiritual world. The soul flinched as if struck. It turned its face, if it could be called a face, toward the altar. And for the first time, Lucia saw in its eyes something she did not expect. Recognition, hope. The vision vanished. And Lucia understood. Even the soul furthest from the light cannot completely forget it. And when the Mass is offered, especially with love, a crack opens in the veil, and grace, like light, finds its way in. But not all souls run toward it. Some turn away, some scream, some hide deeper in the shadows. It was not her place to know which ones could be saved, but it was her duty to offer what grace she could. From that day on, she began offering masses not only for the faithful departed, but for the lost, the forgotten, the cursed, the mocked, the enemies of the church, the ones no one prays for because someone must, and heaven had already answered her question. In silence. It was during a winter morning Mass in San Giovanni, Rotondo, when Padre Pio first noticed the presence. He had been deep in prayer, already absorbed in the mystery of the Eucharist, when a sudden coldness passed through the church like a whisper from another world. His hands, wounded by the stigmata, trembled slightly, not from pain, but from the weight of what he saw. At the back of the chapel, where the light barely touched, a figure stood, motionless, wrapped in a shadow that no candle could pierce. It wasn't human, and yet it was. Padre Pio saw its eyes, hollow, endless, filled with hatred, but underneath there was a cry, a soundless, wounded cry, buried beneath pride and defiance. The soul had died in mortal sin. He recognized the stench of it immediately, not the scent of death, but of eternal separation. It clung to the spirit like smoke to a burnt offering, and yet the soul remained, not gone, not in hell, not yet. The saint's heart clenched. This soul could not pray, it could not ask, it would not ask. Its chains were forged of its own will, locked from the inside, but Padre Pio had seen something deeper in it, a flicker, a distant ache, the final memory of light. And so, he did the unthinkable. He offered the Mass for it. He didn't tell the altar boys. He didn't ask permission. He simply whispered the name, a name no one had spoken at the altar in decades, into his soul, and lifted the chalice. As the consecration began, the air around him grew heavy. The candles on the altar flickered as if protesting. And then, stillness, sacred stillness. When he raised the host, Padre Pio saw not one, but dozens of souls begin to crawl toward the altar. Some glowing, others darkened and disfigured, clawing through unseen barriers. And in the very back, still unmoved, the soul in shadow. But something had changed. It no longer looked away. It stared directly at the altar. As the bell rang and the host was elevated, its body convulsed, not from torment, but from the presence of divine fire. Padre Pio began to weep. He knew this soul might not be saved. The chains were too old, the pride too deep, but for a moment grace had touched it, and that meant the soul was not unreachable. After Mass, Lucia wrote to him. Her letter was brief. Padre, I saw a soul at the edge of fire. You lifted the chalice, and it turned its face toward the light. Does that mean it's not too late? He replied with only one sentence. As long as the altar stands, the door is not fully closed. Lucia once said, the greatest silence in purgatory is not the pain, but the absence of names being spoken. In the quiet of her cloister, she would write the names of strangers, men and women she had never met, whose stories were lost in the margins of newspapers or whispered behind closed doors. Murderers, prostitutes, abandoned infants, suicides, enemies of the church, apostates. She wrote them all because she understood something most of us refuse to face. Some souls are forgotten entirely. No candle lit, no prayer offered, no one even thinking to say their name at the altar. These are the souls no one prays for. Padre Pio called them the starving, and he told Lucia of a vision, one he never spoke aloud in his homilies, one he only shared with her. In that vision, he walked through what seemed to be a barren field beneath a sky of ash. No stars, no wind, only silence and dust. Then he saw them, thousands upon thousands of souls kneeling, some headless, some faceless, others too transparent to fully take shape, each one holding a torn, blackened cloth where a name should be, a name erased. They looked up, but not at him. They looked at the sky, waiting. When he asked the Lord why they did not move, he received an answer not in words, but in understanding. They are waiting for someone to speak their name with love. Only then can the light find them. After this vision, Padre Pio began the practice of offering masses without names, simply saying at the altar, for all the forgotten souls. One day, a woman named Emilia approached him in confession. She trembled as she spoke of her brother, who had died in a riot after denouncing the church. He had cursed God with his last breath. No funeral. No prayers, nothing. I know he's in hell, she said, sobbing. Padre Pio looked at her, his gaze burning. Then why is he in your heart? She didn't understand. If he was truly beyond grace, he said gently, your soul would not ache this way. The ache itself is a sign. Offer the Mass, offer it in love, and leave the rest to heaven. She did. 9 masses, 9 days. On the 10th, she dreamt of her brother sitting on a stone bench, his head in his hands, weeping. A small flame hovered over his chest. When she told Padre Pio, he nodded slowly. He's not free yet, but he's not alone anymore. Lucia began to do the same. In her private masses she would whisper, for the nameless, for the hidden, for the souls locked in silence. And she would feel it, a shift, like air stirring in a sealed room. As if someone, somewhere, had turned toward the light without knowing why. Not every soul will be saved, but every soul can be reached. And in that mysterious tension between justice and mercy, the Mass becomes a bridge over the chasm of loss. Padre Pio once said, "Grace is not a hammer, it is light. It cannot force its way in, but it never stops shining at the door. There are souls, and you may know one, that seem unreachable. They hated the Church. They ridiculed the sacraments. They hurt others deeply. Maybe they even hurt you. And when they died, it felt like a wall slammed shut between them and salvation." But Lucia saw something few understand. She had once prayed for a man who had laughed at her visions when she was a child. He had called her a little witch and years later died in a fire, drunk and cursing. She could have forgotten him. She could have left him to the silence. But one night, in her prayer, she saw his soul, not in fire, but in ice. It was not screaming, it was silent, curled in on itself, frozen. Lucia understood. Not all souls resist with violence. Some simply fold in sorrow, like a flower that never bloomed. They reject grace because they think themselves unworthy. Their chains are forged not of pride, but shame. Padre Pio recognized these souls. He described seeing one such soul during a Mass offered by a grieving widow. It lingered near the altar's edge, but would not cross into the light. The soul trembled, flinched at the sound of the bells, hid its face from the chalice. It had not asked for the Mass. It did not feel it deserved it, but grace is not earned. When the priest whispered the full name, of the man, aloud and with reverence, Padre Pio saw the soul lift its head just for a moment, and that was enough, because grace, when offered in love, moves even the unwilling. It waits, it watches, it knocks, it lingers at the border of the soul's darkness, whispering mercy through the veil. Some people say, "What's the use of praying for someone who died in mortal sin?" The answer is not in what we can measure, it's in the mystery of what we cannot. There is no mathematical equation for mercy, no stopwatch on redemption, and Padre Pio believed with all his being that until the soul is judged eternally, and we do not know when that truly happens, grace can still reach. It Lucia too believed. She once wrote in her journal, "When I pray the Mass for a soul I fear may be lost, I imagine the light of the host touching them like the sun on closed eyes, and I hope that someday they will open. Not all do, but some do." One man, a father who had abandoned his family and died alone, was remembered in a Mass offered by a daughter he had never met. She found his name on a faded birth certificate. That night, after the Mass, she dreamed of him sitting in a pew at the back of an empty church, crying. She didn't know what it meant, but when she told Padre Pio, he said, "He heard. That's what it means. Grace is patient. It doesn't break doors down. It waits outside, singing. It is easy to think the Mass is for the dead alone, but Lucia and Padre Pio taught otherwise. They knew, from vision, from prayer, from tears, that every Mass offered for a soul beyond this world was also a mirror held up to those still living. The dead no longer have time, but we do, and what we do with that time shapes not only our own souls, but reaches back, mysteriously, into the lives of those who have already crossed the veil. Lucia would often say, "A Mass offered in love becomes a bridge, not only for the one we pray for, but for ourselves." Padre Pio witnessed it. He saw it in the eyes of those who came to him in despair, mothers who had lost children, husbands who never reconciled with their wives, people haunted by old sins and unspoken apologies. And again he gave them the same advice: offer the Mass. Why? Because in the Mass time bends. The mercy of Christ floods not only the present, but the past. The altar is not only a place of remembrance, it is the intersection where grief becomes healing, where guilt becomes offering, and where broken hearts begin to breathe again. Lucia once encountered a woman named Teresa who carried a letter in her pocket, a letter she had never sent to her brother. They had parted in anger. He died in a car crash. And the guilt had eaten her alive for years. Lucia told her, "The letter you didn't send can become a prayer." They went together to the convent chapel. Teresa wrote her brother's name on a slip of paper, folded it once, and placed it near the tabernacle. That week, Lucia offered a mass for his soul. That night, Teresa had a dream. Her brother stood by the ocean, smiling, holding a letter in his hands. He nodded once, and then walked toward the light. When Teresa returned to Lucia in tears, Lucia did not smile. She simply said, "Now write your second letter, the one to God." Padre Pio said that every Mass offered for the departed is a spiritual act of mercy, not just for them, but for us. It pulls our hearts out of despair and into hope. It teaches us to love beyond the grave, to believe that nothing is final but God's mercy, and something else happens. Those we help us in return. Lucia described this in the softest terms. "The soul that is lifted by your prayers does not forget you," she wrote. "It becomes your unseen advocate, your secret intercessor, your eternal friend." Padre Pio confirmed this with his own words. "When you rescue a soul from the fire, that soul becomes your voice in heaven." We live in a world of forgetfulness, but the Mass is a divine memory. It remembers the unloved. It calls back the lost. It heals wounds no doctor can touch. And it gives those of us who are still walking through this world a reason to hope. To pray for the dead, Lucia said, is to love without expecting return. And yet, return comes. The chapel was almost empty. That morning, a soft rain fell outside, tapping gently against the stained glass windows like the quiet heartbeat of heaven itself. Lucia sat in the last pew, her hands folded tightly, her face pale but steady. This Mass was different. It wasn't for someone she knew, not really. It was for a woman named Clara, a stranger. She had lived in a city far away, had died years before in the grip of bitterness and silence. Lucia had learned about her from an old letter found in a donated book. No family, no burial, no prayers, just a name, just a date, just enough to love. Padre Pio had once said, "God does not need your perfection, he needs your willingness." So Lucia had said yes, and now here she was, her soul trembling with the weight of a Mass, spoken for a name the world had discarded. As the priest whispered the words of consecration, something changed. The air grew still. The flickering candles seemed to stand taller, and then Lucia saw it. Just beside the altar, in the half-shadow where incense clung to the air like mist, a figure stood, translucent, faint, but visible. Clara. She wasn't radiant, not yet. Her form was incomplete, as if stitched from memory, and mist, but her face was no longer angry, it was open. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked not at Lucia, but at the host, suspended in the priest's trembling hands. For one moment, a moment not measured in earthly time, she bowed her head, and then she was gone. Lucia collapsed, into prayer, not from fear, but from awe. She had seen the veil lift. Later that day, as she walked back through the corridors of the convent, the scent of roses followed her. Faint, but unmistakable. No one else noticed it. No one else needed to, because that Mass had not only opened heaven for Clara, it had opened heaven for Lucia too. That is what the Mass does. It doesn't just rescue the dead, it awakens the living. It reminds us that we are part of a communion, and not just of saints, but of sinners, of seekers, of souls in all stages of becoming. It pulls us out of ourselves and wraps us in the mercy that spills from the wounds of Christ. Padre Pio once said, "If you truly knew what happens at the altar, you would never miss a single Mass for the rest of your life." Now, Lucia understood. Why, so must we. Because love never ends at death. It simply changes shape. And sometimes it takes the shape of a chalice lifted by trembling hands in a quiet chapel on a rainy morning for a soul no one remembered except God.